Fallacies 7 and 8 deal a lot with language, and a lot of our problems when we disagree with each other, a lot of our problems in our reasoning is, a lot of them are connected to issues of language. The first one is amphibole. This is basically, misleading sentences, statements, and think about this one, like save soap and waste paper, right? Is it waste paper that should be saved, or is it just the soap and you should waste paper? So in that sense, keep in mind how you read a sentence can change its meaning, right? Is it, in this one? So think about the various ways that this can be misread and give a total different reading. So this is one of interpretation of language. And then, of course, what I want you to do is not just reading, but of course we're trying to construct academic texts in this course. Make sure that your paper, you don't make these kinds of sentences that are easily misread. So amphibole is something that, it's a fallacy. It can lead you to a certain conclusion that's based on an error in language. And you certainly don't want to be writing in a way that can lead your reader astray to make inferences that you don't want them to make at all. All right, so and continuing on with the theme of languages, our other fallacy, number 8, equivocation, right? That's basically when words are used in different ways. Sometimes I may use them, I may take one word and use it differently as I go along, or if I'm having a discussion, we can often have words that I may use them in one way, you may use them in another way. This is essentially why philosophy takes such notice of what Socrates was all about. Definitions, right? Defining your terms, that's extremely important. All right, so let's think of one kind of equivocation. Look at this little argument. Kind of a silly little thing, but illustrates the point. Philosophy teaches how to argue. People argue too much, so don't learn philosophy, right? So what's going on here? Well, I think now with our background in arguments and fallacies, we can see where the problem is. The problem is basically the shift in the meaning, right? Because the first premise, 1, teaches how to argue, right? Formulate structures. Remember, arguments in the philosophical sense, those are a particular ordered structure of sentences that link together premises and conclusions. But this one here, the second premise, people argue too much, that's more of a quarrel or banter or even, fisticuffs and anger and things like that. So so it is a slide from one term to the other. So that would be equivocating on the term argue. And I've heard this one, you just sit around and philosophy, you just sit around and argue all the time. Well, not really. We make arguments. That's quite different than just sitting around and arguing as in the quarrel. So if that were the case, then yeah, I can see why you don't need more quarrels in the world. So that's a simple example of an equivocation. I want to look at one that's a lot more important and a very controversial topic. We've talked about cultural relativism, talking about religion. Why not? Let's talk about something controversial like abortion. Well, think about the term here, human life. This is a key term, right? Well, how do you define that, right? If you pay attention to the arguments, both pro and or anti-abortion and pro-choice and whatnot, always be aware of how terms are being defined. So, like human life, does it begin at conception? Is that the definition you want to use? Well, in that case, then abortion terminates a human life. We should not terminate a human life. We should not permit abortion. That argument is not only valid, but it's sound, right? But that's if you're using that definition of human life, right? So that definition would be begins at conception. However, if you don't agree with that and use a different one, human life in sort of that colloquial expression when you say get a life, right? You could say that to your friend. He's obviously alive, obviously human, but life means something quite different there. Well, then if you have that definition in here and you look at this argument, you'd still say, yeah, it's valid, but it's no longer sound because abortion doesn't terminate a human life in this sense of the term life, because in this sense of the term life, that's someone who's already involved in the community, etc., etc. So it's a different definition, and the argument is still valid, but it's no longer sound. So arguments change their nature quite a bit when you are very careful in terms of the language that you're using. And here it was a definition that made all the difference, I think, in the world. So be careful about equivocating on terms. Lots of disagreements are only superficial ones in some ways, simply because they're disagreements on the meanings of terms that are used. They're disagreements of definition.